And gosh, time flies when you're having fun or even when you're not. It has been a whole year since the coalition government has taken power. But what do we think of it so far? Some political analysis on this from Dr. Bryce Edwards, who joins us on the program. Bryce, kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Morena, Andrew.
1 year on, of course, the coalition government, the coalition talks took a little while, and it was, it was a strange bedfellows, to say the least. But we're a third of the way through the show, and no huge bust-ups. Perhaps that's the most surprising thing of all.
Yes, the opposition and I guess those on the left have wanted really this to be the coalition of chaos, and that was the term that they applied to the new government, but it hasn't panned out like that at all. Yes, there's always been sort of some tensions between the three parties and some disagreements here and there, but by and large, they've worked quite cohesively together. Certainly ACT and New Zealand First, long have been foes, and the tensions between Seymour and Peters were quite significant in the election campaign, but no, they seem to have a truce. It's been a government that's had to deal with some tough things and done some unpopular and quite radical things at times, but by and large, it's been relatively smooth sailing, especially in terms of those opinion polls.
Yep.
without losing a lot of support.
Now, the problem is, though, they've picked all the low-hanging fruit. They did that in 100 days, basically, and the second year, this is the one where they really need to produce some results before they start the campaign to try and get us to vote them back in again, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we saw some results yesterday with the official inflation figure for the last quarter coming out.
Yep.
And, it was 2.2, I think it was, well below 3%. And I think that's really amazing news for the government. And, we can debate about whether it was Nicola Willis's stewardship being Minister of Finance or things to do with the world economy and
eye-watering interest rates, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, but nonetheless, this is what the government said they were focused on. They wanted to deliver lower inflation, turn the economy around, get interest rates down, and they are achieving those things at least. We're still in something of a recession, and there's a lot of pain out there, but I think the government can at least argue that they're achieving the things that matter for voters.
When it comes to other coalition partners, of course, New Zealand First had their conference over the weekend, and it's been an interesting one because you would think that the first half of the term would be New Zealand First would be making all the gains and all the headlines with, of course, Winston Peters as Deputy Prime Minister, although it seems that David Seymour's been getting more of the oxygen on this one. Much pushback, much to celebrate at the conference over the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, this conference was a time for New Zealand First to celebrate and to look at its achievements in government. And I thought it was a solid but not spectacular conference, and that really reflects, the last year in power.
Yep.
New Zealand First have tried to be more sort of respectable, more conservative, and that's often what Winston Peters does when he gets into power. So in opposition, he's full of colour and claims and and fighting as a kind of outsider, anti-establishment, and then he gets in and he tends to be a bit more mainstream, and so that's really what we've seen. Of course, he steps down in a few months' time, maybe 6 months' time, from being Deputy Prime Minister. And so the forecasts are that he will then move into a more campaigning mode. And him and Seymour essentially swap places. Seymour becomes the sort of conservative, sensible one.
The sensible one, yeah.
Yep. And Peters then has a turn tub thumping and trying to get the headlines.
Because honestly, it was that type of behaviour that got him back into Parliament after some years in the wilderness. and honestly going to need to pull that rabbit out of the hat again in order to get elected back again, do you think?
Yeah, well, that's what you say is true, but and that's always what happens with New Zealand First. They go into government, and every time they lose support,
Yeah.
and that that sort of recipe of being a statesperson, for Peters doesn't seem to work. This time around, I, I mean, the polls are doing better than they normally do for New Zealand First, so
Okay.
they're around 5%, 6% sometimes, which is yeah. I think they'll be very pleased with that,
Hmm.
even though it is on that MMP threshold. They will sort of back themselves enough to know that they'll be able to get back in. And but certainly, yeah, the annual general meeting in the weekend, the conference, it came up with some big policies, especially the one on the $100 billion infrastructure fund
Yep.
that they've put out there, and I think that's been well received, and it's one that across the political spectrum, there's been seen to be merit in it. And what I found interesting is that it's relying on a lot of foreign investment.
Hmm.
And so Peters is now talking about wanting more foreign investment, which is kind of what he used to rail against.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so he's a bit less xenophobic and a lot more wanting to bring in business from outside. So we'll see how that goes.
Exactly. Who said you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Perhaps there we go.
True.
Hey, in terms of general behaviour and getting along nicely in Wellington, that may be happening in Parliament, but not at Wellington City Council. In fact, the local government minister may need to intervene. I understand there's a meeting underway. A please explain meeting with Wellington Mayor even as we speak.
Yes, so Mayor Tory Whanau is currently in at the Beehive, having a meeting with the Minister of Local Government, Simeon Brown.
Hmm.
And yes, a bit of a please explain meeting. And really, she has to convince him that he doesn't need to take action over what everyone's seeing at the moment as a council not really in control,
Yeah.
a council that um, has got some big financial problems, a lot of infighting, and yeah, speaking as a resident,
Hmm.
there's not a lot of confidence amongst the city that these people are, yeah, kind of on top of their game, shall we say?
There's not
And
much
so,
confidence in the council generally, but there's not much confidence within the council for the mayor, it would seem.
yeah,
I mean, there's factions within
it's
council, of course. Yeah.
yeah, there's always factions within council, and there's something of a I was going to say normally there's a left-right divide,
Hmm.
and there is that in the Wellington City Council, except in this case, a lot of the people on the left are the ones that are Tory Whanau's biggest critics.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some on the right and there's some on the left, and then the centre or maybe the centre left, she's got some support. So yes, some big problems there. And of course, the latest stuff has been brought up by the decision last week to rescind their support to sell off the council's third shares in Wellington Airport.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of created a big hole in the budget.
Hmm.
And so now the councillors have to look at where they can get that money from.
Yeah.
And that's why yeah, Simeon Brown is thinking, well, I might have to send in a Crown Observer. I may have to call an early election for Wellington City Council. But yeah, I don't think we've reached the threshold yet
Mm.
where he can actually just replace the council with a commissioner like the last government did in Tauranga.
Or like you did with the health board, well, like has been done with the health
Indeed,
board, not him
indeed.
personally. Yeah. In terms of what has been happening, there's a lot of criticism as well about the mayor working from home a lot, literally phoning it in when it comes to council meetings. A little bit of disengagement when it comes to working relationships together. A lot of criticism about whether or not she's got what it takes to be the sort of leader that Wellington needs. Is that a general vibe, or is that just factions within the council, do you think?
I think it's both. I haven't seen any polling on this to get a public view on this, but certainly all the media coverage, well, the vast majority of media coverage about the mayor have been negative, and I don't believe that's because the media have got it in for the mayor. She's given them a lot of material. So my sense is that if there was an election today for this council and she stood again, she would have a very low vote. I don't think there's any chance she'd be re-elected, but that's my speculation. It's a bit harder to be sure on that. But yeah, certainly she hasn't achieved the things that she said she was going to achieve. She's made a lot of mistakes. So I don't think she's been a very impressive mayor, no.
And now, but hey, as we were saying earlier, if David Seymour or Winston Peters can pretend to get along nicely for the benefit of politics, then maybe there's hope for the Wellington City Council as well. Bryce, appreciate your analysis as always. Thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.